All right, so the Valorant Pro season will be coming up sort of soon, and Sideshow decided to release a video, I guess, talking about some of the moves that Riot have made in the last few months. I believe this is going to talk about involving Saudi money into Valorant, right? The Valorant ecosystem, at least for tournaments, because they're going to allow Valorant to be in the Esports World Cup, or I guess Riot has decided to partner with them to include Valorant. So yeah, it's kind of a long one. So I might not react as much as I normally do and just sort of let Josh go on a bit of a rant and try and interject where it's not going to be super intrusive to the watching experience. But yeah, thank you so much, by the way, for the support lately. Don't forget to like, subscribe, whatever. And yeah, enjoy the video, boys. Thank you.
Esports World Cup, according to a report from Mikhail Klementov, also known as Rita Grev, who's seen internal documents from the Esports World Cup, which include Valorant and actually include game changers as part of their offering this year. I'll just let this scroll while I talk a little bit more, and you'll notice if you're paying attention that part of this article says that Riot actually firmly denies the fact, categorically denied that Game Changers was going to be involved in the 2025 lineup of the Esports World Cup.
Interesting.
We'll see whether, you know, the rest of what they're doing is going to be included. Now, the Saudi governing family is an awful regime to have close business relations with. And I've already made a long video on why I think, and also many other esports veterans, I should say, think, that it's worth protesting that this murderous monarchy is buying up our corner of the internet and making, or trying to make, Saudi Arabia and Riyadh the capital of esports.
So Josh has already made a video about this in the past. I don't remember what it was called, but he did previously talk about Saudi influence on Valorant and esports as a whole.
There's a report that I'll go into later on where the Savvy Games Group, which is run by the Saudi regime, owns, by their estimations, 40% of the esports market, which is absolutely ridiculous. And this is them encroaching even further. Now, I'm not going to go into the morals too much in this video. I've already made a big video about why I think it's such a bad idea.
It was really good. I enjoyed the video.
They are inescapable. But for this video, I want to try to draw focus onto the World Cup and whether it makes sense for Valorant, and also whether it was a success in 2024. There was a lot of public good press about it, but a lot of that was bought. Whether it's a good product even, and ultimately whether it's worth selling our souls for in the Valorant scene to be included. So let's have a look at what the Esports World Cup actually is. So obviously it's a tournament, right? And these were the point standings at the end of the tournament in 2024. Last it was 1, Team Falcons 1, Team Liquid in second, etc., etc.
I didn't watch any of it.
Also important,
I don't even know where
a financial incentives
program.
program. And I'll play this clip out from the tournament so you can see the kind of the vibe. This was the finals of the CS2 tournament that was run there. So we're talking fairly small, you know, we're not talking record-breaking in enormous stadiums kind of vibes. The money is enormous, but the production level was hit or miss. The formats were a little hit or miss. The engagement for the fans there was cool, but not a large amount of fans. You know what I'm talking about. It's not exactly correlating to the amount of money being involved in it. But like I mentioned, it's also a financial incentives program. It's not just a tournament. So they have something called the Esports World Cup Club Program. And that offers incentives to teams. In 2024, they were providing a one-time stimulus to be able to enter into new esports titles, basically to buy up different types of rosters. And those incentives were between those stipends were between $100,000 to $300,000 each as a one-off payment per title, depending on how expensive it was to be able to get a roster in that title. You might not even qualify for the Esports World Cup. They were just giving those out willy-nilly. So they'd allocated $600,000 per team as available funds to earn based on how well you did in terms of various different things. But I mean, for example, one of the things that was listed here, which we'll go on to in here, is talking about substantial social media presence, ability to engage and grow a fan base. These are the kind of things that they were looking at, the ability to promote the Esports World Cup throughout the year. So this is a report from the Esports Advocate, from James Fudge, where he was talking about what's on offer this year around. So this year, like I said, last year they put aside $600K that you could potentially win as an esports organization, or could earn, I should say, outside of the prize pools. And that totaled $16.8 million allocated by this Esports World Cup Foundation. Now, this year, they're allocating $20 million. So even more money being poured into it this year, but split between a total of 40 clubs rather than 28 clubs, which means that actually the amount per organization is going down. Last year, you were able to earn through good performance, through good social media management, through generally providing activation for the Esports World Cup. They would pay you up to 600,000, and now they're paying clubs, organizations up to 500,000.
See, I think what's funny too is I think Riot's like partnership system actually works really similar to this. So that's kind of funny.
That means also that Esports World Cup is getting in 10 new teams that are going to be officially partnered with them. Some of whom could be VCT organizations looking for a quick dirty buck if Riot want to jump into bed and become involved this year. It is a massive cash cow for organizations. On top of what I've already talked about with the stipends, just one-off payments last year of $100,000 to $300,000. They also had that $600,000 that they could go for, and they also had the prize pools that were on offer. There was $60 million up for grabs for individual game prize pools and the club championship. The club championship was basically which of you did better as an aggregate across all of the different games. And of course, the teams that had the most rosters were going to do better in a lot of that as well.
Well, yeah, of course.
So you could see here that Team Falcons ended up walking away with $7 million just from prize pool, not even accounting for what their players won, not even accounting for that extra stipend money and stuff that they were given. So massive cash cow for the organizations. You can see why they want to get involved.
I'm surprised Sentinels didn't go to this at all.
For the Saudi regime to exchange money for a grip on a potentially lucrative industry. I mean, God, who knows where this industry is going. But if it does go upwards, if it does attract tourism to Saudi Arabia, if it does grow into a traditional sport kind of sized thing in the future, then the MBS, who you're seeing here, wants to make sure that his country is the epicenter for that by attracting tourism and investment to Saudi Arabia, to Riyadh, to Qiddiya in the long term. Famous quote here, which I think just sums a lot of it up and his approach to it. He says in a interview with Fox News, "If sports washing is going to increase my GDP by 1%, then we'll continue doing sports washing." And it's not that the act.
Holy shit, that's crazy. That's such a crazy line.
In sports to sell an image that you are not actually following through on, one of equality and one of equal opportunity, it just doesn't exist. So
that's a crazy
what MBS
line.
has said publicly.
Holy shit,
about sports
that
washing,
is so crazy. He's just like, fuck it, let me just say it.
Extremely telling, and that lack of ethics, I think, has already proven to be infectious when you throw around this amount of money. James Fudge, again at the Esports Advocate, did really good reporting, as did Richard Lewis on this, which was that the social media obligations that these organizations had to go through, where they were like tweeting out stuff about the Esports World Cup and making video announcements about it and stuff, 27 of the 30 organizations broke FTC regulations by promoting the Esports World Cup without disclosing that it was a paid advert in 2024.
Really?
So not only are they being paid enormous amounts of money, but they're also pretending that they're not, and they're just entering the Esports World Cup out of the goodness of their hearts.
That's fucking
not
weird.
Disclosing with, hashtag
that
ad
is
and other
bad.
stuff that the FTC
that is
requires.
Really bad.
It's not just the FTC. That would only apply if you're in the US, but Advertising Standards Authority, etc., depending on where you're actually based. The 27 out of the 30 organizations did not disclose that they were being paid to advertise the Esports World Cup, which is ludicrous.
Weird, I'm not gonna lie.
Those 27 organizations that misled their fans include 14 VCT organizations. You can see people in here that I'm sure you're very familiar with if you're a Valorant fan.
Yeah, Loud, Furia, Fnatic.
16 out of the 48 VCT orgs are in this program, where they get money from the Saudi regime via a sports grant that's given through the Public Investment Fund. It's wiggly, it's wobbly, but the money is coming from the Saudi regime and landing in these guys' hands for services rendered of making them look like a reasonable place to go and attend. So if we focus back in on Valorant for a moment, and if we say that the Esports World Cup in 2025 actually did invite these 16 teams who are in here, then what would that tournament look like? Would it actually be a good tournament? Like, would it be competitive? Well, last year, those would have been 5 champions level teams, with the likes of Gen G and Talon, etc.
True.
It would have been 4 masters level teams, so teams like Loud, teams like Harmon Corp that didn't end up actually getting to champions, but made it to a Masters event. It would be 3 regional playoff teams, like Cloud9, like Team Secret, for example.
I mean, they would have had a good tournament.
And then it would also be 4 bottom feeder teams that were really quite poo. Teams like Koi, teams like Furia, you know what I mean? So you would actually have a really large spread, just as if you'd randomly picked organizations to attend an event. You've got some good ones, some bad ones. It wouldn't be a very competitive tournament because you're getting the very best and the very worst and everything in between. So it wouldn't really be a coherent tournament. It would still probably be fairly fun, but it wouldn't feel like a Masters event. It certainly wouldn't feel like a Champions event, even though there were 16 teams there. So again, I don't want to focus on the morals too much. I feel like I made that argument in my previous video. But if we want to just get down to brass tacks of like, what would this look like for the Valorant scene? Let's make a pros and cons list. Let's be simple about it, all right? Because I'm not stupid. There's some good pros to having another big event in the scene.
His video
like
more
money for the organizations. Obviously, I've already talked about how much of a cash cow this Esports World Cup is. They're throwing money around to a ridiculous level, and the organizations, they would love that.
Money for orgs.
But I think there's a really important caveat to go for here, and the caveat is the organizations that are involved in VCT are already part of one of the best, if not the best, partnership deal in the entirety of esports. They have no buy-in required, so they're not paying regular amounts, they're not paying
multi-millions. This is true. This is all, this is what I was saying.
They're part of the fastest growing FPS esport, one that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it has a really successful digital goods market. The revenue that's been coming in based on the skins and based on the champs.
Yeah, so the teams that are in the partnership system get money from skins that people can buy in the game. So whether it be like champion skin, if they actually make it to champs, they get more if they make it to champs, but they still make some money if they don't make it to champs. And then every team has their individual like bundles and stuff in the game. For Val too. So, I mean, yeah, like Sideshow is right. This is probably like the best like partnership deal that any esports org could ever ask for, because there's just no buy-in. There's no buy-in, and Riot gives you money. So
skins and stuff is very, very strong, and you're seeing it turn around organizations and turn them into beasts that can actually generate real reasonable revenue. So it's working. It's not like these orgs are struggling for life, desperately keeping their heads above water. And if they are, that's because they're spending way too much on salary stuff. It's not the case that they can't make decent revenue within the scene currently. So, okay, there would be more money for players. It is a pro. Do they need it? Who knows? But all right. It would be some more money for players as well. You saw those prize pools that we were looking at earlier on. I mean, I think it was 20 million of it was earmarked just for the clubs. So I think that's 40 million, just rough napkin math, that is available as prize pool that would be split between the players and the orgs based on their contracts, essentially, right? So there would be some more money in there for players. That's a good thing. It's another big event with more matches. That's a good thing. That's something that people are really excited about. If they made it so that there were 4 Masters events next year, or 3 Masters events plus champs, I'd be loving that. I'd be loving that.
True.
But again, there's a bit of a caveat there, isn't it? It's not a Masters event, and it could just end up, if they invite all the top teams, if they don't invite their partner teams, if they just invite the top teams, it would only just increase the burnout for top teams. We'd have the same issues again, despite the fact that VCT got lengthened out. These top teams would just be playing more and more, and you wouldn't get more opportunities to see the middle of the pack or the bottom teams, which apparently the fans online have been saying that they really care about. And my question would be, if the 2025 calendar was stretched so that you can make the season flow better, why use that stretch to fit in, to shoehorn EWC in there, instead of making VCT itself better? Instead of using that extra room to maybe run another round robin so that you don't have these weird format shifts between stage 1 and stage 2. To maybe run a third-party tournament that actually fits into VCT. And an idea for that, just to give you guys an idea for what that might look like, would be a pre-Masters LCQ tournament. So let's say we get to Toronto in the middle of the season, and you've got your teams that have made it. Well, if you partnered with third-party tournament organizers, then you would be able to run a tournament which was a best of the rest. It doesn't include any of the teams that have made it to Toronto, so you only get extra matches from that middle of the pack. And the winner of it all gets a wildcard spot into the tournament, whether that be Toronto, whether that be, champs. But all of the LCQs that we've had previously have been regional. If you partner with third-party tournament organizers, you can actually make an international LCQ, which I think would be sick. But that's not what EWC is. The timing of EWC, as far as we can tell, doesn't work out for this. It overlaps with Stage 2. I don't know how they're even going to fit it in the calendar. But if they are going to fit it in the calendar, it's going to be a bit ham-fisted because EWC itself has a fixed period of time that it allots. And that's the reason that we didn't have Valorant involved last year, was that, broadly speaking, neither are very flexible.
Yeah.
So leading on to that, let's swap things around and get into some of the cons. And I think one of the cons follows straight on from that, and there are actually opportunities for third-party tournament organizers like Blast, like ESL even, who do the running for these Saudi events, to work within VCT and to run tournaments that are not competing for Masters viewership, but supplement them, that support them by doing these like best of the rest LCQ kind of ideas. There are opportunities in the year to work with other tournament organizers. Why would you prioritize a tournament organizer that runs a one-off event in the random middle of the year that doesn't fit with your system whatsoever? Why not work with other tournament organizers that are going to provide more consistent circuit-like opportunities for your tier 2, tier 1.5 kind of scene to flourish? Doesn't make sense.
Doesn't make sense.
Another con, the invite system does not fit into VCT, will not fit into VCT, and depending on how they do it, generally speaking, they're a little bit Mickey Mouse with it. They tend to invite their partners a lot. They tend to invite Falcons to basically every event because they want some like local Saudi team for the fans to root for as well. And that just doesn't really work with how VCT is structured. We don't have a lot of invite systems. We don't like them particularly. And so it doesn't really seem to jive with what's going on, especially if they invite too many of those 16 partnership teams and just water down the tournament. And that's what I'm going on to here, which is that the EWC cronyism with team invites does tend to make for worse tournaments overall.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If you look at the Esports World Cup, if you watched any of it for other esports last year, one of the big things that should jump off the page is that they tend to have shit formats. They'll do a lot of single elim formats. That's something that the Counter-Strike community was annoyed about when it very first came out of the scene with Gamers 8, I believe. They were just running a single elim format, but the prize pool was so large that people were still considering
it can work, tournament,
though. Even
like
though
lock-in was a single elim, and it was a sick tournament.
Things to be considered.
But yeah, it's hard to make work.
Tier 1 tournament with single elim. And the production level at these events is not the best. We had a lot of hiccups, a lot of problems with the production. You know, it's similar to a lot of different third-party tournament organizers, it must be said. But when you fit such a large prize pool into a scene, it feels like another large event. And then when the other things don't quite match up to it, you're left with this unusual situation. Where, for example, if you think about how Rocket League was, they had, I think, something like a fraction of the viewership, maybe like a quarter of the viewership, maybe less, tuned into the Esports World Cup. But they still had to reference it when they got to their champions because it felt like a big tournament. But 75% of their viewers had never seen the tournament. Yeah. So you get really silly things like this. And the last con that I'll throw on the list is kind of sucking my own dick, I won't lie. But something that I think will affect an event like this is boycotts from some of the staff. And I can tell you myself, I wouldn't go and work on this, right? So
yeah, he did not go and work on this, by the way.
Egregious amounts of narcissism, if you like, but there will be people involved in casting who will pull out due to...
Here's the thing. I don't think standing up for your morals is narcissism at all. I think this is a fair video to make. I think it's something that he is passionate about. Do I care about this as much as he does? Honestly, no. To be honest, I do care about the Valorant esports product, and I do want it to go places. But, maybe I can be sold that I should be more worried about it. But as of right now, I'm not entirely that worried about it. But I could be sold on that.
Not wanting to be involved for an ethical point of view. There might be some people involved in the observers or the producers or something like that have their own personal problems with working on the event. And so you're likely to get some elements of casting, observing, production that aren't to that tier 1 quality. And you saw that across the board with the Esports World Cup, is that overall it felt a bit more like a tier 2 event in some different areas. Yeah. Not all esports, but in some esports it felt more like a tier 2 event.
Makes sense.
Because of the people that were comfortable getting involved.
Yeah. You're not going to have the top tier talent.
What I want to go into
they're
here,
not going to want to
finally,
risk their
just to
careers
end
over
our
this sort of stuff.
Pros and cons kind of
Makes
situation, is this, which is a massive
I would say Josh and Brad are top
which
tier
is
in terms
reporting
of,
done by Richard
Valorant
Lewis, where he was able
and
to
if you
get
don't have
his
them,
hands on the Esports World Cup handbook, the employee handbook.
You're going to suffer.
This one is really unusual. Now, normally an admin handbook would just give you some information about, like, you know, what to expect in the country, or, you know, very, very basic stuff.
Mm-hmm.
This one that was given out via ESL Faceit Group, who run the events, and was given out to players as well, I believe, yeah. And the admin team, sorry. But it's giving them dress code advice. It's giving them advice on things like public displays of affection.
What?
It's going extremely in depth. I mean, it also provides, this is mad, it provides instructions around Saudi Arabia's Les Majestes laws. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. Where the ESL Faceit Group is telling their employees it is completely illegal to publicly criticize in any way the government, king, royal family, or flag of Saudi Arabia, including on social media platforms.
Really?
Foreign citizens are not exempt from this.
Okay, well, I didn't know that.
I mean, this is a mad kind of thing.
It's a dictatorship
in a handbook,
right?
to the
Probably.
people who are turning up for a, you know, Counter-Strike event, for a Valorant event, for something like that.
I do get his point. Like, I don't think it's great to involve
it's important to be aware
this sort
that
of regime
LGBTQ
into
relations
an
and marriage
ecosystem
are
like
unlawful
Valorant.
in Saudi Arabia.
Like, I don't think that is a good idea.
It's bonkers to have this kind of stuff involved in here.
Yeah.
So there's another enormous con to taking part.
Yeah.
And not necessarily from a safety perspective, but more from
I don't think it's a net positive to be involved.
More
with
from just
the Saudi
showcasing
regime,
that
sure.
I think is evidence that the society is very accepting over there, and actually it's not like you've heard, is clearly not true. I mean, the people who are involved are being given specific advice on exactly what to wear, the colors of what they should be wearing.
Wait, the colors? What the fuck?
And the fact
That's crazy.
That, you know,
that is crazy.
I don't know what is a gay person supposed to do if you give them a booklet that says, just to warn you, LGBTQ relations are unlawful in this country.
Yeah.
that's not guidance in any way. So Valorant was supposed to be involved in the Esports World Cup in 2024, allegedly, but it was excluded due to scheduling conflicts.
Yes.
And so
that's as far as I heard too. Like,
this is the reason that it wasn't
happening.
implemented last year. Now, the
there.
schedule has been opened up a little bit, and maybe that's the reason why we're now seeing it potentially involved for 2025. And this is Riot's reasoning for joining the Esports World Cup for League of Legends and TFT.
Okay. What is the reasoning?
So I think it's important initially, and again, this is from the Esports Observer, to highlight that Riot is reticent to be publicly associated with the EWC.
Okay.
The company firstly said these competitions are not official events. Riot will not be involved in their production. Now, they do help them out with like tournament client, observer stuff, that kind of thing. But what they mean is they're not directly involved in producing every tiny detail like they usually are. They still have to give them the base level of support that, you know, all third-party tournament organizers would need in order to run events. But I think it's also important to take a look at these reasons for why they believe it was a good decision or the right decision to become involved in the Esports World Cup for League of Legends and TFT. The first one is basically that they want to support their players in MENA, Middle East and North Africa, more. They say, in particular, we've heard from players in MENA, as well as Rioters who live and work there, about how meaningful it is to have the opportunity to see their favorite teams from across the world compete live at a major tournament in their region. Okay, so they want to run an event in MENA. All right. Now, the second reason in this paragraph is organizations and players in esports face economic challenges right now. With this in mind, we didn't want to deny esports teams and players the option to participate in a major economic and brand building opportunity.
Okay.
Now, of course, they do limit, and I think rightfully, opportunities to gain economically all the time. They limit certain types of sponsorships. I mean, again, for good reason. They will stop you from getting a, at the moment, they're starting to relax their restrictions on gambling. Previously, at the time of this, you're not allowed to have a gambling sponsor. You certainly still wouldn't be allowed to have a gambling sponsor and showcase it on the main broadcast. You wouldn't be allowed to have an unregulated gambling sponsor. You wouldn't be able to have an alcohol sponsor currently, although they may be looking to loosen some of these restrictions up as well. Riot constantly is in the process of figuring out what the line is for regulation of their partners that they're they have oversight over as to where they're allowed to generate their income from. And there is some really necessary amount of regulation that needs to come from this. So they've decided to discard their job as a regulator here because the economic side was too large to ignore. That's at least the way that I'm reading it. And I think the next thing that's really important to look at is that Riot didn't just try to appear disconnected from the Esports World Cup by saying stuff like, it's a third-party event, not official, Riot will be involved in their production. They also secretly attended events in Riyadh. This was the new global sport conference in Riyadh, not advertised by anybody within Riot. And the only way that people even discovered, the only way that journalists even discovered that Riot had people in attendance was through one of the other attendees, Fahad Ali, finding out that, or rather, posting on LinkedIn, I think this is, not even, what is it? Yeah, I think it's LinkedIn. Is it Facebook even? Dude, I don't know. No, I think that's LinkedIn anyway. Posting that Chris Greeley, the head of League of Legends Esports, was attending this event. So they're trying to stay publicly facing. They're trying to distance themselves from it, from a public face perspective. And Riot publicly has said that they're still in negotiations with Esports World Cup around whether their games are going to be involved in 2025. And it's generally been cautious about publicly associating, especially, I think, from the backlash they got after the Neon deal collapsed in 2020, where the LEC talent, when essentially they threatened strike action if Neon was going to continue as a title sponsor of the LEC because of Saudi Arabia's record on LGBT rights, because of their record on the way that they were doing the Neon project, which is basically just booting out a bunch of people that lived on the land and in some cases killing them as well in some of these megacity projects. And what I think all of this means is, because Riot are being so cautious, if the cons of running this event anyway outweigh the pros, before you even take the moral side into it, and it's really shitty morally, then now seems like the perfect time to protest before Riot gets fully into bed with the Esports World Cup. Because they're already cautious about it. It is such
it's a good point. I actually do agree
with
this point. I think that's
to
fair.
leak these kind of documents that Mikhail Klementov got his hands on, to see what the public reception is like before you make a large commitment like this. Politicians will do it constantly. They'll leak something to the press, they see what the public reaction to it is like, and then they adjust their decision-making as a result of that.
Interesting.
If Riot get in hot water for this association, for them
I don't think they
deciding
will,
to bring Valorant into the fold, then they may end up pulling back. And if Riot get an enthusiastic response, or even a resigned, apathetic kind of response, well, it's not.
Yeah, I think people are going to be very apathetic towards this.
Decided to make their bed, then they'll commit to it, and they'll feel justified committing to it as well.
Okay.
So, I know that there's players that listen to these videos. I've had conversations with players about this, about them learning more from listening to my first Saudi video. If you're a player for a team right now, now is the time to be talking to them about, hey, I'm actually not comfortable going to Riyadh. If you're
I do think players can have a pretty big voice in this too. I think that's good.
Listen, I'm happy to play in VCT for you all year long, but
I like what he's saying.
Contract currently doesn't say that I have to go to a third-party tournament in Saudi Arabia, and I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. And just getting out ahead of something like that, if you are morally opposed to it. If you're a caster or an observer, you should be thinking now about whether or not you would be comfortable going to Riyadh to work on a project.
Yeah, because it's too late when it happens, right?
As well, should also be thinking pretty heavily about whether they're comfortable amplifying this, because that's what the co-streamers do. Is they
I don't know how I would feel, like watch partying EWC or whatever. I don't know. I mean, I definitely don't agree with their politics. But I also don't feel like like watch partying an event would, like, I don't think my audience would be like, oh yeah, he totally agrees with all the government. Like, it's more just like, yeah. I mean, I don't know if there would be like a bunch of rules that you would have to follow when you watch party. I would have to assume so. I think it would really depend on like the rules that you would have to follow. Like if I couldn't throw out the disclaimer that I don't support their like regime fucking obviously, then I think I probably wouldn't do it. Like I would just be like, all right, whatever, I'll just fucking wait for like an actual event to happen and just skip this one. But yeah.
Massively amplify these kind of situations. So let's move on then to whether Esports World Cup was actually successful in 2024. So they had a bunch of partnerships, you know, big names: Heinz, Logitech, G, Secret Labs. Who else? KitKat.
Pepsi. Okay.
These kind of companies.
Yep.
But with this program being a money sink investment at the moment, I would imagine that these brand deals are like for big brands, reputation mostly, attracting other large names to you. Not really asking for very much money, just so that you get the feel of being super legitimate, that you're sponsored by all of these big orgs.
That's a good point.
Everybody, big brands that everybody
that
knows.
is a good point.
And that, by the way, is not something controversial. A lot of people do that. Overwatch League was doing a shit ton of that.
Oh, yeah, totally. I believe it.
Now, one of the reasons that I believe that even more...
It's smart. It's really smart.
A lot of the World Cup sponsors weren't even shown on the Chinese, Vietnamese, French, and Arabic broadcasts. They just didn't even bother showing a bunch of the sponsors.
Really?
So the sponsor agreements cannot have been that important to the Esports World Cup if they weren't even involved in like, what, 1, 2, 3, 4 of the really large language broadcasts that they were pumping out there.
I wish I like understood a little bit more about
now you do often
Saudi,
have, like,
but as far as I understand,
you know,
like, the amount of money that they have is unfathomable.
But this one doesn't really seem to be related. I don't know why that would be the case, that Chinese, Vietnamese, French, and Arabic were just carved out and didn't really get any sponsor callouts. In terms of being a success, though, for metrics that most people track, viewership, this is where we're really going to get into things.
Okay.
So the Esports World Cup claimed it had more than 500 million total viewers, and that the 8-week competition in Riyadh itself saw more than 2 million visitors. Okay. For starters, I just want to go through this. They called it the most watched tournament of 2024. It's not one fucking tournament. I hate it when organizations do this. VCT itself is a little bit guilty of this. VCT of the entire year is not one tournament. And I hate that the esports charts, for example, classify it as one tournament.
Okay.
I guess in some kind of sense, it does crown one winner at the end of it. But fuck if that's how any fans think about it. And the same could be said for the esports.
I don't really get the point he's making here.
It's a bunch of other tournaments for other games all put together. So, all right, that is already a useless claim.
Okay.
But
so I think what he's saying is that, like, because it's so many different games, it's not one tournament. It's multiple games, therefore multiple tournaments, I guess. Kind of. I don't know.
The actual numbers here as well, I
didn't fully get what he's trying to say here.
So if you look at the claim of the amount of actual like visitors that turned up to Riyadh, that's over 35,000 visitors a day, every day for 8 weeks.
Jesus.
There's no way that
crazy.
the esports was bringing that in. Now, maybe Riyadh saw that amount of visitors for all of its shit, and they just literally counted how many people came in through the airports over those 8 weeks. But that is absolute bullshit. The esports tournament, the Esports World Cup, saw 35,000 visitors per day, every day for 8 weeks. Absolute wank. And their metrics, the metrics that the Esports World Cup is claiming, of 500 million viewers with 250 million hours watched, that cannot be verified because a lot of it would be coming through their Chinese viewership. And unlike the devs and the publishers, I personally don't believe really that the Esports World Cup would have accurate metrics of Chinese broadcast data. As far as I'm aware, they didn't have.
Also, how would they get
tight partnerships with those?
Yeah, how would they get
broadcast
those data?
companies? I could be wrong there though. Perhaps
how would they get
Perhaps
that
they
data?
do have really accurate data about their Chinese viewership. But what you'll see is that the companies that can actually track the data that isn't through China, it was about half that. Right, so it was 120 million hours watched, not 250 million. Maybe half of their viewership's coming from China. I mean, they did have some games that were super popular in China, but it just seems likely to me that they fudged the numbers slightly.
Yeah. Why wouldn't they, though?
What I want to focus on, though, is a metric called, average viewership. People, they call it average minute audience if you're looking at Nielsen metrics or something, but it's basically just that, average viewership. So that's the metric that gets sold against if you're, talking to your biz dev team. And that's what we should be comparing against if we're looking like for like comparisons.
Okay.
So what you can see is that from esports charts, what I'll just write it down at the top here because I've gone and scraped the website for these stats, so it's not like I'm giving you a direct source. But you can go and find it on esports charts. It is publicly available.
Okay.
So esports charts.
I'm sure I'm going to link to the original videos so if you're like curious about his research or whatever. You can go check out the original video.
Data that isn't Chinese showed 1,149 hours of airtime, which amounted to 101,000. So I'm going to put a K. Average minute audience. So this is the average audience that they had throughout their entire event was 100K. Okay. So that's pretty decent. They're reporting, the Esports World Cup is reporting a 218,000 AMA. So this would be including the Chinese viewership. So over half of their viewership coming from China. Do I believe that? Not really. No, I don't.
No?
And so we're going to be focused on
I do.
just the data that we
because
can track
I feel like
China's because you can do much more interesting stuff with that data than just believing everything
that
he says and not being able to see it in granular detail. So the 6 games that boosted that viewership. So for what I'm saying is, if they had an average of 101,000 viewers at any one time, so which were the times where it got pulled up? So the things that were boosting that viewership upwards were Mobile Legends Bang Bang, which is this huge peak here. Then also Counter-Strike was much more than 100,000 average. Okay. Garena Free Fire, which I don't think is actually on this graphic, but extremely popular. PUBG Mobile, which is this one.
Is PUBG still really that popular?
Which was extremely popular at the beginning of the event. And League of Legends as well, which ran their Esports World Cup through there too. Now, they also had another game called Honor of Kings, which only on esports charts, it only had an average minute audience of 64,000, but it's also been at the top of China's iOS App Store for revenue for the last 7 years running. Damn, and has been the world number one for revenue for iOS and Google Play combined from 2019 to 2023. So for 4 years straight, it was the number one in the world for revenue, despite only being available on the Chinese iOS store.
Okay.
Like versus any other app that you could combine Google Play and iOS globally for. So, and it was only released outside of China right before this Esports World Cup. So if you're asking, oh, well, maybe the Chinese viewership is real, I would imagine a lot of it came from this game, Honor of Kings, which is fantastically popular, but not with people outside of China.
Fair enough.
So I want to take you
I don't know. I can believe the Chinese viewership just because I've seen like how the Asian events did in Valorant this year. So I don't know.
Throughout 2024,
I'm still like skeptical of the actual numbers, but I can't believe that a lot of it was China.
I actually prepped for this video in like August, and it took me 4 months to release it.
Damn.
But you know the data's all still the same. It just doesn't include later data points.
Fair enough.
There's enough data here to be able to get a really good idea.
Okay.
So this is Counter-Strike 2, right? So this is organized by AMA. So they have more average viewers the further right they go on the x-axis, and then viewership in thousands along the y-axis going upwards. So this is 500K, this is 1 million, this is 2 million. Red is peak viewership, blue is average viewership. And when we look at the rest of these graphs, it's all the same thing, except they're not always ranked. Sometimes they're ranked chronologically rather than by average viewer. So this is Counter-Strike 2 events. This is the Esports World Cup here, and you can see that compared to the major, it didn't really do very well. But compared to the non-major events, it was certainly hanging around there. It was more popular than one of the non-major events.
I mean, it's also like the first event.
Very, very similar to IEM Dallas, both in terms of average viewership and peak viewership. So I think you could call that a success. Considering that it was a new tournament that had been rebranded from Gamers 8 in the year before, and it was an 8% increase in their average viewership from Gamers 8 last year as well. It was it was a pretty decent event. In the same tier, I think, as the non-major events. You go down to League of Legends, and I think this one's interesting because League of Legends doesn't have many data points that you could accurately compare to. I'm trying to compare like to like at all times with these, right? I'm not trying to compare Esports World Cup viewership to some regional play somewhere, because it's not. It's an international gathering of what could be the best teams at any one time competing for millions in prize pool. It should be considered a big global event, something similar perhaps to MSI. Now, it's obviously not going to be as big as MSI, so take this one with a pinch of salt, because there isn't really a good thing to measure it against. But I thought that MSI was the best. So MSI was about twice as big. You can see the raw numbers here over on the left. But it had almost twice the average viewership, and it had over twice the peak viewership. But still, those are no numbers to sniff at. I mean, the Esports World Cup got 570,000 average viewers, peaked at over 1 million. I would say for League of Legends in particular, where Riot tend to be quite jealous about their viewership, they don't want third-party tournaments to be better than them, I would say that's a win. They probably didn't want the Esports World Cup to be as good as MSI, because that would imply that, like, Riot's doing something wrong almost.
Yeah, so pretty much.
I think that's a win for League of Legends as well. And as I scroll down, you'll start to see some of these getting worse and worse. I'm starting with the best. StarCraft 2 viewership, pretty much identical to one of the other big tournaments that was run right beforehand. The viewership isn't large. It's, like 20, 30,000 average viewers, but it's in the same ballpark as their premier tournaments. You look at what used to be FIFA. So this is FC24 viewership here. So FC24 is a weird one. It used to be FIFA, whatever, FIFA 12, FIFA 24, etc. Mm-hmm. It lost a lot of brand recognition after EA's partnership with FIFA expired in 2023.
Makes sense.
But then when it relaunched as FC24, a lot of people were really excited at the beginning, and then they stopped giving a shit again. Yeah. And to be honest, the Esports World Cup did not do very badly in the context of that massive drop-off. Right? If you're assuming you're not going to be able to get back to the heights of the very first tournament that was run in this game, and you're just starting to get people interested into it again, then the Esports World Cup was, better than the E-Champions League and the E-Premier League finals. Not quite as good as their World Championships, but relatively decent. Yeah. And if you look at Apex, I would say this is where we start to see the slip-off a bit from those top-level games that I've mentioned into the 15, 16 titles that didn't perform very well. And here, Apex doesn't look like it's massively worse than the Split 1 and Split 2 playoffs. But what I think is fairly interesting to note is that the viewership did beat regional records, but it's still significantly below these international records. The peak viewership in particular is really nowhere near. It's like half of what's going on here. This one's almost half of the Split 1 average audience. So while it's better than regional play, people were not tuning in as if it was official endorsed ALGS content.
Makes sense.
Now, Tekken, fighting game stuff, I don't know about. So I'll just leave you with this Tekken viewership and Street Fighter viewership. I've ranked these by average viewership. So the highest, I don't know why I did it this way around, but the highest is on the left, and they get worse as they go to the right. And EWC is kind of in the middle for both Tekken and Street Fighter. Okay. Now, what does this mean? I don't know, because I don't really understand what all of these different events are, because I'm not super ingrained in the FGC. So some of these seem to like they would qualify as for EWC, but I think they also have value as standalone tournaments. I'm simply presenting the data and allowing you, perhaps the more informed viewer, to make your own conclusions off the back of this. But it seems all right, pretty successful. Hard to say for me.
Okay.
Now, Warzone viewership is interesting. The Call of Duty viewership. Now, up here we've got Call of Duty Warzone. Down here we've got Call of Duty, the standard stuff that's played in the leagues. So, for Warzone, the NA Finals is regional, EMEA Finals is regional, and EWC placed underneath the regional finals for North America and EMEA in terms of that average viewership. Peak viewership did go up more, but I mean, it's nowhere near what their World Series is, the only other big international event. Warzone's a bit weirder because there were two community events that actually only World Series beat. So there were two community events that were running Warzone.
Oh, this is
the
Warzone.
Optic Launch Party and the
I know nothing about Warzone. I know a little bit about
Gauntlet or something.
The other stuff.
And they outperformed the NA and
CDL
EMEA
stuff.
finals. So if you go down to Call of Duty viewership, there was only one major in the entirety of the last 2 years that EWC beat. But it was the Stage 4 major from this year. And the Stage 4 major from this year, if you don't follow Call of Duty, they had really bad format issues because basically all of the teams were already locked for champs. Nobody gave a fuck about Stage 4 major. And so the viewership massively dropped off a cliff. But you can see usually it's very solidly at this kind of line. And then this...
I don't know why, tournament organizers do that so much. They just have events that matter fuck all.
It's kind of line for the peak. And the EWC was, it was like a really bad major, but it was still in the same kind of ballpark. Let's move down and look at PUBG viewership. Now, PUBG Mobile popped off with EWC. PUBG did not. So this is their Global Series Phase 3, Phase 4, average viewership. EWC just in the bin compared to that. Absolutely in the bin. Now, EWC was still ahead of the regional play, right? The like online, there is no LAN, that kind of stuff. But what I think is so interesting about PUBG is that it got absolutely dog-walked by the Nations Cup that they ran themselves, that just ran a proper World Cup format where it's like different nations competing against each other. It got absolutely blown out of water by that only 2 weeks later. They had an event called the Esports World Cup, which was just normal teams playing. And then they had an event called the Nations Cup, which used the World Cup format where you have Team USA, Team Canada, Team Brazil, Team whatever. Mm-hmm. And it fucking owned it in terms of viewership. Way higher. Way higher viewership. 4x their viewership for a sixth of the prize pool cost. So, really unsuccessful, I would argue, in PUBG. Broadly due to format, right, you could say. This is Rainbow Six Siege here. Both of these graphs. One graph includes the Six Invitational, and one graph doesn't. Because again, I'm trying to compare like to like. And I don't think that EWC was genuinely rivaling the Six Invitational that crowns the winner at the end of the year for Rainbow Six Siege. I think it was more similar to a major that they have multiple times a year, like the one that was held in Copenhagen, Atlanta, and then Manchester. And it underperformed. It underperformed. Now, this is unsurprising, considering that Rainbow Six is the title that boycotted a major that was going to be held in the United Arab Emirates in 2022. Mm-hmm. But it does still represent a 61% increase in viewership compared to Gamers 8 that ran the year before. So more people are tuning in. It's just a lot of people still either don't give a fuck or are morally opposed to it. Yeah. Which, I hard to tell which. Let's have a look at Overwatch 2 then. So, Overwatch 2, there were actually some people talking about it being a fairly successful tournament for EWC.
Speaking of Overwatch, I think Marvel Rivals will 100% be at EWC. I think there's like no shot that they're just not going to be. Unless like the Chinese government has a bone to pick with like Saudi. I don't know if they do. Like I don't know geopolitics that much, so maybe they do. But yeah, as far as like I would guess, yeah, they're gonna be there, to be honest.
Because they looked at the peak viewership only. But that was when XQC got paid to co-stream like the last two games. The rest of the time, without so XQC, the average viewership shows you what was going on. It was abysmal. Absolutely abysmal viewership. Like atrocious. A third of what they were getting for the first major of the year. This is the kind of viewership that NA regular season games get in Overwatch.
True.
So, shockingly bad, considering that was supposed to be their biggest tournament of the year in terms of like prize pool and that kind of stuff. But it just didn't convert to viewership at all. Fortnite viewership is fucking laughable. The EWC's Fortnite viewership, the Fortnite tournament was getting beaten by qualifiers for NA and EU regional events. Not NA and EU regional events. The qualifiers for those regional events were pulling in more viewership than the Esports World Cup. They weren't even close to the actual regional events that were going on in NA and EU. And they were even getting beaten by regional events in Brazil, which is not a big region for Fortnite. So they got fucking laughed out the park. And I'm amazed at why they're even bothering to run events in these kind of games again. There's a very good argument when you look at the stats for getting rid of like 15 different titles at the Esports World Cup because they massively underperformed. Let's have a look at Rocket League. So Rocket League was the tournament I was talking about before where they ran the Esports World Cup before the World Championship and fuck all people tuned in. But they still had to reference it at the World Championship when they're talking about their stories and how many titles people won, even though no motherfucker watching knows what they're talking about because nobody watched the tournament. So when you have big prize pools, but low viewership, you get these bastardized storylines as well. Yeah. Where it feels like, well, didn't they win a S-tier tournament? But can you really call it S-tier because nobody watched? Like, if a team lifts a trophy in the middle of the woods, but nobody hears it, they didn't win a fucking important trophy. So yeah, Rocket League was...
I mean, from like a viewer perspective, sure, but like from a player perspective, that could have been the biggest moment in their entire career, right? And it could be the biggest moment of their entire career, but not only that, it could be the moment that actually changes their entire career, right? Like, it could be the moment where they go from a player that chokes to a player that just wins. So I do think it matters. I think Josh kind of off on this. Like, I sort of disagree with this, but yeah, I get his point of view on it, but I'm just not so like dead set on the whole aspect that like it doesn't matter. I think it does matter. And it might not matter from a viewer perspective, but I do think it matters from a storyline perspective. Maybe that's what he's trying to say, and I'm just fucking bullshitting, but I don't know.
Pretty appalling. Losing to literally any EU qualifier you choose. Pick any EU open qualifier that got more viewership than the Esports World Cup in Rocket League.
Sheesh.
And for
I didn't even know Rocket League was,
I think, by far and away the worst performance.
Not gonna lie.
Is part of the reason why I'm surprised that Riot is still happy to be involved with the Esports World Cup and still wants to heavily push it. I know that TFT is not their darling baby. Maybe that's starting to become Valorant, but in theory, that's League of Legends, and League of Legends did fairly well. But TFT was like, no one seemed to give a fuck. They got worse viewership than the regional cups and the qualifiers. This is the average viewership that they were getting before. This is what happened.
They have an esports for TFT? Bro, what? Okay, whatever. Well, I guess there's ranked, but
the Esports World Cup, I mean, it is pathetic.
I mean, whatever, pathetic. Man. They're going to try and get that money wherever they can. It's just kind of insane to think like TFT has an esports.
13K average viewers tuned in, whereas normally they get like 75, 80K for TFT. I mean, that's... Have a word with yourself. Have a fucking word. You're selling out your soul for that. Get a grip. Get a fucking grip. Okay, so all of this to kind of point out, and by the way, let me go on to say, all of this data was gathered through a partner of the Esports World Cup, Esports Charts, who tried to like twist. I think this is a really good example of how being paid to do something, even if you try to be as upstanding as possible, still colors the wording. Yeah. I am not alleging that Esports Charts fudged the numbers in any way. Okay. But I think their coverage of it was extremely positive, whereas they wouldn't normally have done that. For example, Overwatch reaches 100,000 live viewers thanks to community casters. Basically, that's just a good way of saying the only reason they did any kind of viewership at all was because they got paid for XQC to come in and co-stream it. And yet it's all framed as a positive. Like, oh, thanks to those good-hearted community casters who were paid associates. Again here, Fortnite's World Cup performance reflects the reliance on the North American market. Like, yeah, we didn't do that well, but that's because everybody watches America. And then they just start fucking blaming the French. Esports World Cup Rocket League fails to reach potential because of the French, because of those goddamn French. They always call the shots, and they weren't interested. They didn't make it to the finish lines. It's not great when you get this amount of money involved. It does twist the lens through which people, even I think subconsciously, I don't think maybe these were even conscious biases from the people writing these articles. Right. Okay. So this is, I think, though, one of the most important pieces of writing that Esports Charts did on the entire thing, which was their analysis of how efficient the Esports World Cup is with its money. Okay. So,
probably not very, if I had to guess.
Offered $60 million of total
probably not
prize
going to be as
now, some of that wasn't available to players. It was on the Club Championship. We already saw that earlier on. But a lot of it was. And if you compare it to like VCT, for example, VCT sat down there with let me write in yellow actually, $4 million for the whole year compared to $60 million for one tournament.
What the fuck? That's insane.
You've got to think that's what money talks, too. Right? Must do. Not even slightly. So the Esports World Cup brought in 2 hours watched for every dollar put up for participation. So for every prize dollar, they got only 2 hours of somebody sitting down and watching their tournament.
Interesting.
The Six Invitational, the Rainbow Six Invitational, gets 4 hours watched for every dollar. VCT gets 70 hours watched for every dollar.
Wow. That's crazy.
You are sat there watching VCT for 70 hours for every dollar that Riot puts into the prize pool. That's how much
impressive.
VCT attracts people to watch because it's a good product than because it's got a fat prize pool. That's the power of actually having a good product that you're not paying for. This 2 hours watched per dollar is disgustingly, staggeringly inefficient in terms of its money.
Yeah, it is.
Staggering.
It really is. That's fucked.
By the way, this is before you even calculate all of that money, the 100... Oops, where's the one? The 100 to 300,000 that were being paid per org, per esport, for them to pick up titles. So remember that was, in total, an extra 16.8 million on top of the 60 million that was being paid out to organizations. That's before you get into how much co-streamers were paid, because that hasn't been made public anywhere. So it's reasonable to assume, I think, that over $80 million was paid out just to try to get people to promote it. Not to get people to run the event. Yeah. I'm not saying that you should compare this to the cost of running VCT, because the cost of running VCT is how much to run the studio, how much to pay the casters and observers and production staff and all of that kind of stuff. We're just talking about paid promotion of the event through prize pool to make it seem lucrative, through money that goes to the organizations for them to buy more involvement with more rosters, to buy in through their social media, to pay co-streamers to go and watch the event. We're talking like 80 mil.
Yeah.
Way under 2 hours per dollar put in at that point. Staggeringly inefficient.
I mean, yeah, it doesn't surprise me. That number doesn't surprise me at all, because if you just have fuck tons of money, the way that like Saudi does, like why would you be efficient with it? Like who the fuck cares? You just have so much money. Like it doesn't matter. Why would we be efficient?
It was Team Falcons, the all-stars of the Esports World Cup, a Saudi Arabian team who also have a huge amount of engagement in this. They competed in 18 out of the 22 available titles. They only sat out of 4 of the available titles.
Okay.
Like, yeah, no shit, they were one of the favorites to win. Absolutely no shit. And where do they get their money from? Nobody will tell you. It is a secret. It is a secret. They won't say whether they're owned by the Savvy Games Group.
Oh, they won't
or
say
otherwise
it.
by the Saudi royal family. They deny that they have that their backers have involvement with those groups, but they're very mealy-mouthed with how they make those denials, making hard denials and then walking them back a little bit later on in future interviews. They've been blocked from buying Australis' LEC spot. Sure. Falcons was going to try to purchase this from Australis, an LEC spot, but Riot Games did not approve of the sale. Okay. Then Falcons tried to buy Rogue's LEC slot, and again, Riot barred the sale. And then in Valorant, they actually recently released their VCT EMEA Ascension roster. Some of you might have seen this, when they were actually doing pretty well. But according to the Esports Advocate, this was not because Riot blocked anything or told them that they had to. But the speculation is, from the Esports Advocate, that this paragraph here. In the course of our research, the Esports Advocate has learned that Riot does in fact have a global esports ecosystem-wide, Valorant, League of Legends, TFT, etc., rule in place that requires the disclosure of ownership and also bars teams with direct ties to governments or government-controlled entities from participating in its Tier 1 leagues. So what that means is that if Falcons are owned by the Saudi government or by the PIF fund, which is government-controlled, or by the Savvy Games Group, which is also government-controlled, if they were owned by any of these, the actual kingdom itself, or the PIF, or the Savvy Games Group, they would not be allowed to play in Tier 1 Valorant. But also it could just be that they refuse to disclose who owns them at all. And just the act of disclosing their ownership was so anathema to their being that they decided to drop a team that might have been able to make a punt for playing in Tier 1 of Valorant. Now, if that's the case, I would worry about who actually owns the team, even if it isn't the Saudi government through some subsidiary. But it does definitely feel like the ownership here, being so opaque, is a bit of a problem. And maybe one of the reasons why they're getting such enormous amounts of investment and are tied to almost everything that the Saudi government is doing with regards to esports.
That's fair.
Falcon CEO in this interview, which I'm going to mute, but I'm going to summarize what he says here because it does go on for a little while. Falcon CEO said, quote, "We have private shareholders who have been with us since day one until now, and they don't have any shares in any other esports companies or gaming companies beside Falcons. So we don't have anything to do with Savvy. We are just located in the same country." Now that's kind of bullshit, all right? Just like publicly availably bullshit, because they're sponsored at least by a PIF company. So the Saudi Telecom company is a company owned through the PIF. So it would be beyond simple for them to have owners that are basically puppet owners, and then just all of their money could come direct through sponsorships from the PIF fund via something like the Saudi Telecom company.
No problem.
But, okay, they then backtracked on that statement. So they said they don't have any shares in any other esports companies or gaming companies besides Falcon.
Well, that's a mistake.
They then backtracked and said, well, actually, none of our shareholders own 5% or more of any PIF company. Okay. So there's something unusual going on, for sure, with the Falcons ownership. Is it 100% directly connected to what's going on here? Maybe not. But there's something unusual going on, for sure. And one of the ways that I think you can see that it's not completely disconnected from Savvy Games Group, PIF, etc., is that when the Esports World Cup announced its Pepsi partnership, it also announced in this... The Esports World Cup is ostensibly, according to the guy who runs Falcons, not associated with them, not affiliated with them. But in this announcement, they also announced for Falcons that Pepsi was the naming partner of the Falcons venue, called Falcons HQ by Pepsi. That was one of the main things that Esports World Cup themselves announced. Now, Esports World Cup has said before that they can facilitate brand deals for people who are partners for them. This is the first one that I've ever seen them publicly announce. Like, Falcons did not announce this. Esports World Cup announced this. Okay. That seems odd to me, if they were completely separate entities, for sure. Taking a break away from the Esports World Cup for a moment and focusing back in on Valorant, I want to... Oh, and sorry, just to finish this on Team Falcons, I don't want to say that it was complete cronyism that they won the Esports World Cup. They did actually have to... The way that the Esports World Cup was set up, you do actually have to win in one of their games in order to qualify to win the entire thing. You can't just come second in everything and win through being involved. You can come second, third, fourth in a lot of stuff, but you have to win at least.
Yeah, I didn't assume
Falcons did that.
They could do that
in Call of Duty, in Warzone, I think this was. And they won in Garena Free Fire as well. So they were participating in 18 out of the 22 games. They won 2 of them. They placed well in some of the others as well. They have huge amounts of money. They build very good rosters because they can afford to outcompete a lot of other people. Where's that money coming from?
Nobody knows.
Smile. So let's focus back in on Valorant. I want to listen to this, which was from this was from right before Champions Soul finished, 4 months ago.
Okay.
And John Needham said that Valorant has been in talks with the Olympics.
Interesting. Really?
It was about
that's sort of surprising.
Somewhere in the future, Valorant will be included in the EWC.
Let's refresh this one.
It was about traditional sports, trying to include esports more and more, for the Asian games with League of Legends and other games as well. So,
I didn't see this
what do
interview.
you think Valorant kind of places when it comes to joining those traditional sports events?
I mean, we would love to have Valorant included in those types of competitions. I think the sensitivity with Valorant is it's a shooter generally. It's been something as we've started talking to the Olympics about what their plans are. With the Asian Games, we'll see what happens, but we love the Asian Games. The Asian Games has been great for League of Legends. We would love to see Valorant competing there.
Okay. So one of the reasons why it's relevant that he's talking about the Olympics is that Saudi Arabia just bought the fucking Olympics. So the Olympic Esports Games, Saudi Arabia essentially managed through money and also through the reputation that they've gathered by running other smaller things to make a successful bid to run the Olympic Esports Games for 12 years out of Saudi Arabia.
Crazy.
So they've partnered with the National Olympic Committee of Saudi Arabia for 12 years. This is the first time that the Olympics has ever been officially associated with esports. And they partnered with Saudi Arabia for 12 years. Now, in this announcement, they noted, just to quote from it, they were talking about Saudi's great, unique, the NOC of Saudi Arabia will bring great, if not unique, experience in the field of esports to this project. I then want to go on to look at the Savvy Games Group here, and Savvy Games Group, who are the gaming kind of portion of the public investment fund of the Saudi government, right? They're the company that goes off with all of their money and tries to make investments and stuff. They said in their annual report for 2023 that they estimated that they had 40% of the global esports industry. So if you look here, Savvy's strategic investments in VSPO and the fact that they've got the ESL Faceit Group, the acquisition of Vindex, have bolstered Savvy's leadership in the global esports market with a current estimated 40% share of the global esports industry. That should be really, really worrying. That should be really worrying if it was anybody. That should be really worrying if it was my next door neighbor, Gwynifred, who's the loveliest little old woman in the world. That would be very concerning. The fact that it's also a regime that's committing terrible human rights abuses and has a distinctly inequitable society and views on equality, I think it makes that terrifying.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely
And to go back
horrible.
to
Like
what they were talking about with the International Olympic Committee.
Question is, what can be done about it?
They don't. This is not a uniquely experienced.
Is it in the hands of the consumer
with regards to esports?
Kind of.
It simply isn't. I mean, if you wanted to talk about uniquely experienced, maybe you could talk South Korea.
It's hard to be convinced that
China
boycotts
recently as well, actually.
Very well,
but
or super effective.
Saudi Arabia was late to the party, like really late. Wasn't involved for decades while esports was growing. Hasn't had a large amount of experience.
Yeah.
And in the biggest tournaments that they run, tend to have quite poor formats that don't get the viewership that they should be expected to get based on the money that they're pouring in. They're staggeringly inefficient with their money.
I mean, they're just spending that money incredibly.
They don't have great experience. They have shit
experience. They're not hiring
experience,
the right
basically.
people for whatever reason.
One of the things that I thought was terrible, genuinely just disgusting.
I think like part of the problem too that they're gonna run into is that, at least for now, anyways, a lot of the like top talent will not want to work for them just because it's gonna reflect badly on their careers and it's gonna affect them down the line. But I do think like the more prevalent it is, the more offers they get, the more chances, the more the chances increase that eventually they will sort of just like cave and be like, fuck it, it's not that bad. And then I guess like that's sort of where like Josh is pretty worried about them getting to is just that it's socially accepted that we just take deals from these horrible countries, but I don't know. Or horrible dictatorships that treat people like shit. I guess that's what he means.
Was this. The International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach said, by partnering with the Saudi NOC, we have also ensured that the Olympic values are respected, in particular with regard to game titles on the program, the promotion of gender equality, and engagement with the young audience, which is embracing esports. The fact that you've added promotion of gender equality in there, I think, is just horrendous. It seems to increase. It seems to refer to the huge increase of women in Saudi sports generally, because they're definitely increasing the amount of women involved in Saudi sports. Absolutely, they are. That's undeniable. But that has increased at the cost of wider overall repression and a background of terrible gender inequality that I've already talked about in my previous video.
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia was chosen to lead the Women's Rights Forum.
What? That sounds fucking insane.
At the UN, after 45 different countries decided not to run, allowing Saudi Arabia an unopposed bid to be the chair. Yeah. So this is the kind of stuff that goes into rebuilding that brand. If the Olympics are looking towards Saudi Arabia, and if for a moment we assume that the Olympics are acting in good faith, which they're not, they're a wonky organization to begin with. But assuming that they are acting in good faith, they're looking at Saudi Arabia and they're seeing, oh, the amount of women involved in sports is going up. Oh, they are being involved in all of these different esports things and people seem to be liking it. Oh, they're leading the Women's Rights Forum. You know, these are ways in which they're laundering their reputation despite not making meaningful changes at home. And in fact, actually being more repressive in certain areas. And some of those areas, I mean, this is from May in 2024, women's rights activists consistently jailed. They also have started leveraging terrorism charges. So if you disagree with the charge, right? I think there's a quote down here. The terrorism tribunal was used to convict her to 11 years in prison. The crime was opposing laws related to women, such as the male guardianship system and the hijab law, participating in several hashtags opposing these laws, and having several photos and video clips in indecent clothing. By the way, they're referring to stuff like this. Actually, specifically, they're referring to that when they talk about going to the shops without wearing an abaya. Photographing this and publishing it on Snapchat. These are the crimes. And if you disagree, if you try to justify the actions of terrorists, which she is apparently, by describing them as exercising or defending their rights, that is an attempt to legitimize terrorist crimes. And that would also be you'd be prosecuted under the terrorism offense. So by saying that it's acceptable to do these things and that it was too harsh and she is just exercising her rights and, you know, going about a peaceful protest, you're a terrorist. These are ludicrous things to also have to balance with the fact that they're like chairing the Women's Rights Forum and upholding Olympic values of gender equality. It's madness. Yeah. One of the other things I think is dangerous, they're also trying to, what's it called? It's not even sports washing, but they're trying to wash their image when it comes to digital spaces as well. The Internet Governance Forum was held in Riyadh, talking about advancing human rights and inclusion in the digital age.
Place. What the fuck is this?
And enhancing the digital contribution to peace. This is a regime that is throwing people in jail for tweeting, for retweeting, for using hashtags. Not for violently stirring up the populace through social media, but literally for retweeting normal activism.
Yeah, I mean,
except they don't
obviously just think it's hard to argue that like there was obviously just
give the right to the women eventually. They still end
in comparison to the Western values. It doesn't work. Doesn't add up. So right, for sure, 100%.
I don't think that it's problematic to support these kind of events if the Saudi regime was genuinely fast tracking to become a more progressive place and using their Vision 2030, their like plan for where the country should be going to go towards that.
But
if that was the case, if you could see a consistent, maybe not even consistent, maybe
they're just like straight up not doing that.
But if you could see a general trend towards this country is becoming much more progressive over time, if they're fast tracking it through MBS, then I think being involved in that process would be very reasonable. I think that would be perfectly fine, even if they weren't at the point that you agreed with you.
With that,
but
sure.
I don't think the evidence supports that. The evidence does not support an overall trend towards the country becoming more progressive at the current time. It is advancing in the areas that are facing the camera whilst clamping down extremely hard on the areas where the cameras are not facing. True. And all while paying and politicking to be able to make these headlines happen where they end up looking better. And I think it's important to get, quotes, and that's what the Esports Advocate has done, from people who work as activists within the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia on
what the
why.
fuck? Now my frames are fine.
I think this is a great point. Princess Rima, who's one of the spokespeople for the Saudi regime when it comes to sports and women's participation in them, speaks about the growing participation of women in esports, but forgets to mention they are not considered free and independent women. They are minors. They need permission of their guardians to do anything. The vast majority do not have guardians who are lenient. Saudi Arabia is no different from Afghanistan, says Elise Evans, in the sense that if a girl was forbidden from going to school by her guardian, there is no cause for recourse. No legal entity would interfere in what is considered a family matter. And you can read more about this. You can go and look at my previous video as well. But I just don't buy it. And I think one of the other things that came out just this year as well in 2024 was, okay, let's start here. Something I didn't talk about in my previous video is that Saudi Arabia does not have a codified penal code. And what that means is...
What does that mean?
That when they decide how long to throw you in jail for, or whether to apply the death penalty, or what kind of punishment you should get for a crime, there is not a written down list of this goes to this. If you look at most countries, they will have a you stole, therefore the max penalty that you can get is 5 years or something. And then what most people are getting is 1 year with a suspended sentence or something like that. In Saudi Arabia, there is not a penal code that has been written down and codified. There was a draft of one that got leaked in this March, and it showed that the idea that this country is going forwards in terms of its penal system, in terms of its criminalization of what's allowed and what isn't, was a joke.
Yeah, apparently so.
It's not a reformist agenda if the draft of the penal code is anything like what they were considering putting in. So, for example, the draft would codify the use of the death penalty as one of the primary punishments, continues to prevent corporal punishments such as flogging. It criminalizes illegitimate consensual sexual relationships. It criminalizes homosexuality, abortion, fails to protect women and girls from gender-based violence. They, at the moment, do not have a codified system, so you only look at what's actually happened to people. This is what they're planning to do to people based on the punishment. A draft of it came out this year. It was heinous. It is all nonsense PR, the idea that it's undergoing fast-tracked progressive reform. MBS allegedly, from people that know him very well, has talked a lot about trying to get women into the economic sphere in Saudi Arabia because he wants to increase the GDP, and he thinks that that's something that would be extremely beneficial for the country. And it is, of course it is. But the fact is they're not going about it in any kind of way that is upholding them as equal citizens whatsoever.
Yeah, makes sense.
So the fact that they're involved in the Olympics builds on all of the previous things that they've done before. So there was this announcement way back, and I really want to show you this to show how even just small amounts of rot build on top of each other. So this is from December 2023. So this is from a full year ago, over a year ago at this point, right? So Prince Faisal was able to get appointed as the president of the International Esports Federation, and then signed this cooperation agreement with the Global Esports Federation. Have you ever heard of those orgs? No, you fucking haven't, because they're both absolute nonsense organizations with big, impressive names. And the whole point of it is just to bolster legitimacy, right? So you say, we have somebody in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabian regime who's super high up within the International Esports Federation and has partnered with the Global Esports Federation. Anyone on the outside who doesn't know shit about esports thinks, oh, wow, that must be really important.
Yeah.
And then you run the Esports World Cup. That whips up a bunch of good press about how efficient you are at running the world's best, world's biggest, massive, life-changing money, and brings good press to Saudi Arabia as well. You see here CNN reporting on the Esports World Cup, BBC reporting on the Esports World Cup, etc. And that builds the groundwork for then the IOC to get involved. Because then you have a track record of, well, we're high up in the International Esports Federation, means nothing. We've partnered with the Global Esports Federation, means fucking less than nothing. We've run the Esports World Cup and it was the biggest esports event of all time. Yeah, but the viewership was kind of a failure in like the majority of the games, and you were horrendously inefficient with the budget that you allocated to it. And this is only your second time of ever doing it. It's not like you're super experienced. And there's plenty of other people that have been out there doing it longer. You've just bought your way in. But okay, all of those things stacked on top of each other without the requisite knowledge to be able to critique them properly actually looks like a pretty good resume. And so then you get stuck with stuff like this where they're able to actually do things that now make them look extremely legitimate. If you talk to your, mum or grandma in a couple of years' time and they tune in and see the Olympic esports games, they are going to just associate Saudi Arabia with that is where esports happens. That's how you permeate the mainstream, is by making these incremental rotten moves like this. Just bad actors able to slowly infiltrate unimportant architecture of the esports scene and then use that unimportant architecture to build onto something that becomes more important, especially when they have the cash to be able to do it. Mm-hmm. So what can you actually do to stop this rot from taking over? And I think developers absolutely have to be involved with this, right? I think that the number one thing that would really help in this entire situation is if Valve declined to give them tournament licenses to run events for Dota 2 and CS, because those are the two of the massive games that are involved. They would have the largest impact. Riot would also have a really large impact, considering that Valorant is about to take part potentially in the Esports World Cup in 2025. If Riot decided not to take part with League of Legends and Valorant, that would be another two big blows to the Esports World Cup. And I think the most persuasive case would not be to go towards Valve and Riot, because they're actually benefiting from it to some degree, because they're having success there. I think the more persuasive case would be for those publishers of the games that were failing at the Esports World Cup. Games like Rocket League, games like Overwatch, these kind of games that we saw towards the bottom end of my rankings of like the ones where they were actually seeing viewership comparable to other international events, the return is way less for the brand risk. Like, you're risking a lot of brand risk, or you fucking should be risking a lot of brand risk if anyone gave a shit. But the return is far less. At least it makes sense to Valve, because they're getting a lot back out of it. I think another big thing is that the organizations can and should refuse to participate, especially in games where the traction is not worth the brand risk. If you're thinking about, should I get involved with the Esports World Cup in a game where the viewership sucks, why would you take the brand risk? And I think it's important to make the brand risk large so that becomes an important calculus for those organizations.
True.
And I also think that the players should try to leverage the organizations as well. If the players are opposed to it, the players have a lot of power in these situations. And you actually hear it from orgs like 100 Thieves when they
I don't know how much
their
power they
participation
have,
in the Esports
to be
World Cup.
honest.
Not many organizations even will go on record talk about it.
Maybe they have more than I think.
It's just greed. But
Maybe.
100 Thieves president Jacob Anderson said that they were not competing, but they are taking funds to explore new rosters, right? So that's what 100 Thieves said, that they weren't competing in it, but they were part of this club support program, taking money to be able to get new rosters, potentially participate in the future. And one of the big things that they said about it was that it is near impossible to convince the best players in the world to compete for us if they aren't able to participate in some of the most competitive and prize-rewarding tournaments. Now, essentially, that's the organization just shoving responsibility onto the players there. I'm saying, well, the players won't join us if we're not involved in these big tournaments, so we have to be in the big tournaments, otherwise we can't recruit the best players. That doesn't currently apply to Valorant.
What?
I don't want us to be in a position where that does apply.
That's so insane to say. That's so funny. What the fuck?
Although I suppose the players are still getting good prize money at the end of the day, so maybe they are, again, simply that greedy. But I think that shows you that the players do have responsibility in this situation, because it does also affect how the orgs think about these things. In as much as you can actually take this at face value. And the co-streamers also, I think, could try to do the not taking the bag one fucking time challenge. Because if you look at the co-streamers, which is called community casters, they accounted for 43% of the viewership at the Esports World Cup. And massively, massively more in these kind of games. I mean, these had like no co-streaming viewership. But these kind of games, huge co-streaming viewership. And so, if you are a co-streamer and you're thinking, what can I do to make a difference here? You can do the biggest, you can make some of the biggest difference out of any players in the scene by simply not covering the tournament. Yeah. You can watch the VODs afterwards on your own time if you like, and be knowledgeable enough to talk about it at a future date of who won and how they performed and that kind of stuff. But not covering it live and not contributing to the hours watched, not amplifying the product is, it's of massive benefit to altering the return on risk that other people in the scene.
I think if you care about this issue and you do want to make a difference and like whatever.
So that's my overall thoughts on the Esports World Cup. Essentially, even morals aside, I don't think it's a great fit for the Valorant scene. I think that you could do a lot better with different.
No, I think he's right.
I think the orgs don't necessarily need the money because Valorant's actually got a pretty good digital goods system. I think that
there's like that, but it's just like I feel like once you get in bed with these types of people, like you just I don't know if you ever if that ever really leaves your like legacy, I guess. And I just think like Riot is rich enough to where they don't really need to do any of this kind of shit. So I just don't get why they would do it. Right? Like obviously more money is better, right? At the end of the year, that's like how companies work. But I'm just sort of a little like confused on why they would fucking like do some of this stuff. I don't know. Is it like the absolute end of the world that they do it? Like, no, I guess not, but it is just overall bad, right? For an esports that's growing, that's got a lot of young viewership. It's just bad to sort of like potentially make them think that these countries are great in any way, like, because they're just sort of not that good in like most ways. And it's like sort of shit to say, but it's just like you could influence them into believing that these countries are pretty good. I don't think they are pretty good. think they are like quite bad in a lot of the ways. So it's sort of a problem. Anyways, let's let Josh finish here.
For many of the games involved was actually much, much worse than people would be led to believe from a casual perspective if they only saw the headlines. And I think for Valorant, it's entirely possible that Valorant actually would be in that upper tier of actually got quite good viewership because people enjoy tuning in and watching big tournaments. And I think that's why it's really. And the other point here to make is that Riot are currently walking on eggshells to some degree, clearly anticipating a level of public backlash and allowing themselves an easy exit if that backlash is large enough. All of these things together imply to me that we should not be getting involved with Valorant in the Esports World Cup. That it's not worth
He's assuming that they're going to back out
with our access to third-party tournament organizers, with the extra space that we have in the calendar. And I think now's the time to make a fucking.
I don't know if I assume that, to be honest. I don't know if
Paramore are famous, not just emo scene famous. I'm talking touring with Taylor Swift.
Okay, anyways, so that was the sideshow video. Sorry, we like 2x it because, I mean, it was like an hour and 20 minutes. So I think I 2x it for the last like 8 minutes of the video. If you want to catch the full video, it's going to be on his channel. I'm going to link it below. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate all the support and stuff. We're almost at 500 subs, so let's try and get there. And I'll see you in the next one. Honestly, shout out to Sideshow. He is probably, him and Bren are my favorite casting duo apart from like, what is it? Hypoc and, I mean Steel. Steel and Hypoc are, wait, it's not even Hypoc. What the fuck am I saying? It's, Jesus. Steel and, okay, whatever. I don't have their names off the top of my head. But anyways, the British casters, they're great. They're sick. They're awesome. Anyways, thank you so much. See you in the next one. Bye.